Hey everyone, welcome back to the Irretrievable Breakdown podcast where we discuss all things divorce. I'm Matt Dolan with Dolan Divorce Lawyers in Connecticut, and I am joined by my co-host and the managing partner of our firm, Nicole Bikakis. You can catch our show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify if you want to catch us on the go. And today we are going to discuss the 10 most common financial mistakes that I see people make through the divorce process. But before we get into that today, Nicole, tell me how your day's going so far.
Day's going well. Off to a good start. Sunny weather. Can't complain.
Nice. Well, I had a colonoscopy this morning.
Oh, God.
Pretty
That's
fun
a
time.
great start to your day.
PSA to everybody. Get your colonoscopy. I have it, it runs in my family, so I have to get it a little bit younger. I think 40 is when men are supposed to start it. I'm 39, so here we are. But
Although I think it's not for 45 now, because I keep telling Connor to talk to his PCP about getting the referral for one, and his doctor hasn't given it to him.
Gotcha. Have you ever been put under for surgery?
I'm trying to think. Well, I've just for my wisdom tooth, they put me out for like a little bit.
Like out, or did they give you like laughing gas?
First time I went, they gave me laughing gas, and it was a terrible result for me. So then the second...
Why, like it hurt and you could feel it the whole time?
I couldn't feel it, but I could hear and sense everything. And it didn't hit me well, and I was crying I couldn't stop crying. And it wasn't even that I was in pain. I was just so upset. Like, it hit me the wrong way, and I was so upset. I was inconsolable. And the poor dentist, orthodontist person, they apologized to me afterwards. Like, I'm so sorry, because I was like despondent. And then the next time I went in, I made very clear I wanted to be put under, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
It's like,
it's wild.
You wake up and you're like, oh, it's done.
It's so weird to like remember yourself going under. Like I remember being like, all right, I'm fading away. And then you're just gone. And next thing you know, you're awake.
It's honestly a miracle. I loved it. I loved just going and waking up being like, it's done.
Yeah. I remember when I got my wisdom teeth out, I was under the laughing gas. I think I got either 2 or 4 out, but I just remember like who does it, a dentist or an orthodontist, whoever it was.
Yeah.
He was like
oral surgeon.
He was like a little short guy, and I could see him like up on a stool, like with a chisel, like banging, like ripping at my teeth. But he had to like stand up, and he was really like putting his full weight on my face. It looked like a pretty blue collar job that he was doing on my teeth.
What was your reaction to that, though?
I don't know. I was on the moon. I was full of laughing gas. So.
Those are the best videos, though, to watch the videos of people coming out of getting their wisdom teeth pulled and still on the effects of the laughing gas.
Yeah, I'm sure I said some wild stuff to people. So, anyways, financial mistakes that people make during a divorce. So the first one I've got is everyone making the assumption, not everyone, but some people making the assumption that everything just gets split 50-50 down the middle. And that is not the case. Connecticut is an equitable distribution state, which does not mean equal distribution. It's equitable. So ultimately, a judge can do whatever he or she thinks is fair and equitable, what they think is fair. So what that often means is keeping premarital assets separate, for example, particularly in shorter term marriages, or keeping inheritance assets separate particularly if those inheritances were kept in separate accounts throughout the marriage. Or sometimes if a judge feels that one of the parties was at fault for the divorce, they may not distribute assets equally. They may do something like 60-40. So that's my first one. Nicole, anything to add to that?
No, I agree with that. It really is fact specific and it's judge specific. So oftentimes your attorney will counsel you that we do see an even distribution typically of assets that were accrued during the marriage. But if you entered the marriage with certain assets, you may get credit for those, assuming that you didn't commingle them, that your partner didn't, let's say, use their premarital assets and yours were left untouched. They really look at the full picture and try and come up with what is equitable, meaning like really what does fairness call for in this particular circumstance. And it's not just like a 50-50 divide like in certain like common property states.
Right. All right. Second mistake I see is keeping the house without understanding the true cost of the house. So obviously emotions can get involved. You might have an emotional attachment to your house, or if you have children, you feel that it is important to their emotional stability to stay in the house that they lived in before. And that can be important, but you also have to consider the financial implications. It really doesn't make sense to stay in a house if you really can't afford it. You have to keep in mind the fact that you are going, the total pie of income between you and your spouse, who will soon be your ex-spouse, you're going from having to support one household, presumably, to two households. So that means there's kind of the same amount of money to go around to pay for more expenses in that you have two households. So you want to keep in mind the fact that you, yes, want to make sure you're giving your kids emotional stability, but also think about the emotional impact of your kids having a parent who is spread thin financially and doesn't have the financial resources to feel secure and maybe pay for things in the house or outside of the house, activities, etc. There are negative implications to being in a house that you cannot afford. So you want to keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, I think one of the biggest fallacies is this idea that you can maintain the same standard of living, or that the expectation is that you should and be able to maintain the same standard of living that you had during the marriage after the divorce. And I think many people underestimate how much more it costs to maintain two households versus one household. So when you're getting divorced, you're still looking at that pot of income and assets that you had as a married couple, and now it's supporting two separate households and lifestyles. And to your point, Matt, it sometimes does not make sense and it's not feasible to maintain that marital home post-divorce. And it's always going to be the better outcome and for your children to have a parent who is financially stable versus a parent who's, holding on to an asset that they really can't afford.
Now, the third common mistake I see people make in the divorce process is not understanding the true tax implications of various assets in their estate. So not all assets are the same. So take $100,000 in a bank account. That is different than $100,000 in a 401k account. 401k funds are pre-tax. When you withdraw the money, you have to pay income tax on those funds. And that's different from a Roth account. So you may have a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k. Those are after-tax assets. So you do not have to pay taxes on Roth funds when you withdraw those funds. Real estate, for example, think about the fact that if you go to sell a piece of real estate, there may be capital gains implications, or you will have to pay closing costs when you sell the house. Or separate from real estate, if you have an investment account, a brokerage account, something like that, if you sell stock within the account, you may have to pay capital gains taxes when you liquidate the funds. So just keep in mind that not all assets are the same. There are tax implications on various assets. So just make sure you are working with your attorney or a financial professional to understand the various tax implications of assets when you're considering how they should be divided up. The next common mistake I see people make is ignoring attorney's fees. So paying attorneys, it can be expensive, and it does not make sense to spend $1,000 on attorney's fees to fight over a $500 asset. So you really want to be picking your battles and thinking about what is actually important to me? What is actually going to matter 3 years, 5 years down the road? And is this something that I can just let go and, let my spouse win this battle? Or is this something I really want to dig in on and spend the attorney fee resources on to make sure that I get what I think is fair? So you want to be listening to the advice of your counsel on what fights you should be fighting and, thinking about it yourself, really thinking about what is important to you and what makes sense to fight for financially. The next mistake I see is hiding assets. Just don't hide assets. It's not a good idea. The other side will have all sorts of ways to figure out if you are hiding assets. They will be able to access all of your bank records, all of your credit card records, all of your pay stubs. They can hire a private investigator to look into assets that are being concealed. And if you get caught hiding assets, a judge is just going to assume that you're hiding a ton more assets, and they are going to think that there's more there than there actually is, even if there isn't. You can't say, oh, you caught me, judge. I was hiding that asset, but that's it. I'm not hiding anything else. That argument doesn't work. A judge isn't going to believe you. It's going to kill your credibility with the judge, which will hurt you on both financial aspects of your case, but also custody, other aspects of your case that have nothing to do with money. So you don't want to kill your credibility with the court by trying to hide assets in your divorce. All right, so number 6, as far as major financial mistakes I see people make during the divorce process, is making major financial moves during the divorce. So once you file for divorce or once your spouse has served you with divorce papers, what are called the automatic orders go into place. And those say that you cannot sell any major assets, you can't conceal assets, you can't change beneficiaries on certain, on health insurance accounts, on life insurance accounts, etc. So don't go out and buy a new piece of real estate. Don't go out and buy a new car. If you really need a new car, your car breaks down, just talk to your lawyer first, or just let the other side know that you are going to be buying a new car because you need a new car. And if they give you any problems, just get into court and get permission from a judge. So just major financial moves, you want to clear them with your attorney or the other side, because you don't want to be in a situation where you're getting in trouble with the judge for violating the automatic orders.
You're essentially opening yourself up to a motion for contempt, pendente lite, meaning during the pendency of the divorce. And so you're expending time and resources dealing with a contempt motion when you could be focusing on discovery and just resolving the case.
Right. And as far as other major financial moves, just don't also start spending a ton of money because you're going through a divorce process. I've seen some people say, like, I'm just going to start spending like crazy so that my spouse doesn't get half. Well, that's not a great move. And they may just end up getting more than half of what's left because a judge feels that you're spending money unnecessarily. So that's whether depleting assets or accumulating debt. You don't want to be doing that.
Not to mention that it amps up the cost of the process, because then if you're out there spending more than normal, your spouse is either going to have their attorney or a forensic accountant go in and analyze your spending and then bring that evidence to the court. So it's depleting assets in the marital estate on attorney's fees and expert fees, and ultimately not going to end well for you.
Right. All right, number 7 is ignoring health insurance changes. So after you get a divorce, in most cases, before the divorce, when people are married, they're on the same health insurance plan. So one spouse has insurance through their employer, and they are able to add their spouse to their health insurance. You need to keep in mind that once you are no longer married, you will not be able to be on your spouse's plan, or your spouse will not be able to be on your plan, and the person who was covered on the spouse's plan before will have to go out and get their own coverage. And that is, these days pretty expensive, unless, of course, they have insurance through their employer. But even if they do have it through their employer, they probably have to pay a portion of the premiums. So just make sure you're educating yourself on what the health insurance premiums are going to be for both parties after the divorce is over, because that will factor into the conversation, particularly on child support and alimony, because that will impact the week to week cash flow of both parties.
Also, don't forget about that HSA. So if you have one of you, whoever was carrying the health insurance during the marriage, has a health savings account that has a considerable sum of money in there, that money is part of the financial division. So don't forget to look at those accounts.
Exactly. All right. Number 8 is assuming that a divorce decree will remove your name from a loan. So let's say you're getting a divorce, you have a joint credit card or a joint student loan. Right. Any kind of joint loan. And the divorce says that the wife is going to be 100% responsible for the loan. And then, a year later, you get sent to collections or something. And, you can't go to the company and say, hey, I got a divorce. The court said that my wife is 100% responsible for the loan. I don't owe anything on this. That lender does not care. When they lent the money, both you and your spouse were the lenders, and they are not bound by the family court order to absolve you of any responsibility for that loan. So what you would have to do is file a motion for contempt to, make sure that your spouse gets current on the loan, and then you may seek some financial penalty because your credit was damaged, but like good luck figuring out what that financial penalty is. And from a practical standpoint, a judge isn't going to give much of, a penalty to your spouse. You're just going to end up with worse credit, and you have nothing you can do about it. So to avoid putting yourself in that situation, just keep in mind that you are not absolved of loans. So only have your spouse be 100% responsible for the loan if you know that they can actually pay it. And if they can't, then try to figure something else out. Take away, maybe give them fewer assets in exchange for also not carrying the liability. That way you can take that asset and ensure that liability gets paid off. Or if they are receiving a piece of real estate, you'll need language in the divorce agreement. Let's say you both are on the mortgage and your spouse is keeping the house. Usually the divorce agreement language will say that your spouse is to retain the house. You'll quitclaim the property to them on the date of divorce, and they are to refinance the property within 6 months of the date of divorce. It can be whatever time period you want. 6 months, 3 months are usually reasonable time frames. And if they are unable to refinance the loan in order to remove your name from the mortgage, then the property is to be sold and, figure out how the asset is to be divided. So just make sure you have language in your divorce agreement that says that the loan has to come out of your name and that there are some mechanisms in place for ensuring the property gets sold if your spouse is unable to qualify for a mortgage or unwilling to get a mortgage in their own name for whatever reason.
Also, just importantly, keep track of any debts that you have your name on, right? And so even if your ex-spouse is the one who's going to be responsible for it and they're going to continue paying it, make sure you're tracking that to ensure the the debt is being repaid as it's supposed to be, because you don't want to be blindsided by a collections note. And in some cases, it may make sense if you have the cash, you might just want to pay off that debt so it's not sinking your credit, and then just take them back on a motion for contempt, and the court will order them to now pay you instead of whoever the lender was.
Right, exactly. So you may, like in your real estate language, you may put in something that says if the opposing party, who is keeping the house fails to make a mortgage payment, you can make that mortgage payment in their stead, and then they owe you that money back. That way you're making sure that no loans get defaulted on and there's no negative impact on your credit. It's also a good idea to pull your credit before your divorce is finalized, just to make sure that you're fully aware of any loans that are in your name and you're not particularly if you're not the one who manages your family finances, to make sure that all of the loans are being accounted for so that you're not having to go back to court to say, hey, we forgot about this, $50,000 loan in my name. We need to figure out who is responsible for this. So pulling your credit is always a good idea if you have any doubts about the loans that are in your name. Number 9, failing to properly value assets. So this is somewhat similar to the tax situation we already talked about, but there are certain assets that you want to get a present day value on. The one that sticks out the most is a pension. So if somebody gets a pension of $3,000 a month, and they have that pension and you have a 401k worth, whatever, $150,000, that pension has a present day value. That is probably a lot more significant than you think. If they're receiving $3,000 per month for the rest of their life, that is, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, depending on how old that person is. So just make sure you are getting a present day value on any pensions if you are negotiating division of assets, which you will be in your divorce. Also on real estate, just, properly value your real estate. Go out and get an appraisal. Don't just rely on Zillow. It's not super accurate. It can be accurate, but it also can be completely off base, and appraisals are relatively inexpensive. So it's always a good idea, if you have any doubt as to the value of an asset, to go out and get it valued so that you have certainty. And if you have to have a trial and go in front of a judge, you want to give the judge some reassurances that the value of the asset that you have on your financial affidavit is actually accurate.
And that's an area where parties get super frustrated and they just want to move forward. They just want to use the value that they think is the value, and they don't want to go through the exercise of getting experts or appraisals involved to get an accurate value. But understand that if you don't do that during the divorce process and then your divorce resolves, property settlements are permanent. And so you can't undo that in the future. And so even though it's going to take more time and be more expensive in terms of potentially expert fees or attorney's fees to work on getting those valuations done in the divorce, you're going to be better off for it later. And it also ensures that you are entering into a fair agreement, that you are understanding really what all the various values are, and whatever sum or settlement you're agreeing to accept to resolve the divorce is advisable and is fair. So don't skip that step just because you want to get the divorce done.
Right. All right. 10th and final mistake that I see people make in their divorce process is believing what their friends tell them happened in their divorce. So your friend may tell you, oh, in my divorce, so-and-so happened. Well, every situation is completely different. And, you can certainly listen to what your friends say happened and maybe, bring it up to your attorney and say, hey, my friend who got divorced a couple of years ago, they said this happened. And, you can use that as a talking point with your attorney. But we see it happen all the time where somebody can get really dug in on something that happened in their friend's divorce, allegedly. And, sometimes it's legitimate, but other times it's like, yeah, well, your friend's situation was different for X, Y, and Z reason. Or just like, yeah, there's no way that actually happened in your friend's divorce. Like that doesn't sound like something that would happen. So, of course, it's important to rely on friends and support people to go through such a difficult time as a divorce. But, sometimes it can get in the way of getting emotions stirred up when they don't need to be. And, it's generally best to listen to your attorney, as long as you have a good working relationship with your attorney. If you don't, then go out and get another attorney and have somebody who you're comfortable working with and you can really connect with. But you're bringing your attorney into the process for a reason, and you really want to listen to their advice, listen to their counsel, have them help you understand what you should fight for, when you should settle, etc. And that strong relationship with your attorney will hopefully help you get across the finish line of your divorce in as painless a way as possible.
And really, it's rare that you will ever fully know or be privy to the details, the circumstances surrounding your friend's divorce, and the same goes for your friends. They're not really understanding the full picture of your divorce, and so you can't really be basing your own strategic decisions on what happened in a friend's divorce. And they're not the ones going through your divorce. You are. So it is very easy for an outsider to sit there and demand and tell you, you have to really hold firm on this, don't accept less than this. They're not the ones who have to live with the consequences of the result of your divorce. So really listen to your attorney. And if you don't trust them, if you're finding that you're not, you don't, the working relationship with your attorney isn't one that you're feeling a lot of trust or having a lot of faith in, then find someone who you do have trust and faith in and listen to them.
Yes, I would agree with that piece of advice. All right. So, Nicole, those are my 10 most common financial mistakes that I see people make in the divorce process. Have I forgotten anything important?
I would say just the one thing is just generally people letting their emotions drive the decision versus just looking at the financial piece of it and just settling for something that makes financial sense versus just trying to exact some kind of, I don't want to call it revenge, but trying to make someone, holding firm on a point out of like principle more so than just getting past the divorce. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes it's really important to get closure and have certain things that don't necessarily have a financial value, but have a lot of emotional value drive decisions. But what your attorney's going to want to help you do, and hopefully you listen to them, is get you through the divorce as quickly and painlessly as possible so that you can get on with your new life. And so while sometimes the concept of a sunk cost, really, I think people need to think of that more during a divorce. There are things that you can't change. They've happened, and the best way to move on from them is to just get past this process, and living well is the best revenge possible, right? You just need to get out of this process and move on. And so not letting your emotions or your hatred for someone determine like your financial decisions in a divorce.
Right. And of course, it's not just getting out as quickly as possible, no matter what. We, of course, recommend that you protect yourself financially. But, some financial battles just are not worth fighting. And, if it's a small piece of money and, you're saying it's for the principal, my little red flag always goes off whenever I hear somebody say it's for the principal. And sometimes, that principle is important to uphold. But other times, despite it being for the principal, it can be better to just let it go and try to move on with your life and start the next chapter of your life.
Divorces take time if you're, and even under the best of circumstances. It takes time to do your financial disclosures, really make sure everyone understands what's at play and come to a settlement on the financial piece. And then if there are children, the custody piece. So it's always going to take time, but there are certainly ways to really prolong a divorce if you're going to argue over every little thing, and you're arguing over it really because you're not quite done with the relationship, or you want to, in essence, exact some kind of, again, I don't want to say revenge, but you're trying to get something out of your ex-spouse for like
pain.
Yeah, if you're just putting you through this, and like it's oftentimes it's like, I've given you like the best years of my life, and so like having given the best years of your life, you are now set on making this divorce as painful as possible, and that is hurting you just as much as it's hurting them. And so again, do what you need to do to feel emotionally supported. I mean, a lot of clients that choose therapy to help them get through the divorce is like a helpful tool. Do what you need to do so that you can focus on being like concentrating on what is going to get you through the divorce and then moving on with your life.
I think that's good advice, as you often have. All right, so that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Irretrievable Breakdown podcast, where Nicole and I discuss all things divorce. As usual, if you have any additional questions, you can contact our office. And if you are looking for representation in a divorce or family law case here in Connecticut, we would invite you to contact our office as well. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next week.